I think looking at how fast technology is evolving, and especially in the last couple of years, whether you're referring to AI, which is of course impacting all our societies, whether you're referring to even the emerging technologies of quantum technologies, I think they're going to fundamentally change how our societies function. So if we give a simple example of the risks that we don't foresee, simple examples that we can all understand. Today, when you have a legal case and someone is going to be prosecuted for a crime, today the mere evidence of a video of that person doing the crime, a mere evidence of his voice committing the crime, acts as a very high bar of evidence on the individual. With today's situation where videos and pictures and voice can be recreated with a very high accuracy, in the same way in the past, you had DNA to be able to identify your blood, and that acts as whether you did it or not, or whether there's a video. What tools are prosecutors, legal authorities are going to rely on to validate whether that's me or not? Because now just the mere fact of seeing me on a video or seeing my picture or hearing my voice could mean nothing. And while it was a key pillar in the past, so this is one of hundreds of examples where if we don't update our regulatory authority, the decisions of what will determine evidence and not evidence, the entire fabric of that is going to evaporate, if not already evaporated in this regard.
Thank you. When it comes to the responsibility of tech leaders, many of whom I'm sure are represented in the room, what does it actually look like in practice?
I think it's a challenging dilemma at the moment, especially in the age of AI that we are living in. In the past, you could say, look, as new emerging technologies evolve, you look for safety, you look for robustness of systems before rolling them out. And in different countries and different players, you definitely see more checks and balances before certain technologies are rolling out. The issue at the moment is AI is such an impactful technology that many governments, many entities are unable to put the brakes on how fast it's evolving, due to the fact that it can impact companies, it can impact societies in a very large way. And it's a big dilemma at the moment on, do you put the brakes? Do you shut down the systems around the world until you have the high assurance? I don't know how that will be done, because if one country does it, whether the other country will do it or not. Or do you let it be free reign for everyone, which is again not practical. So I think the responsibility for tech leaders is to see what internally also can be done in terms of some checks and balances, because tech organizations have to take some responsibility for what tech they issue out. It cannot be that we'll issue it and let society deal with it. And again, it's a very fine line between doing what is possible and at the same time really racing extremely aggressively in this AI race that it seems to be extremely hard to put any massive brakes on. So it needs a very strong collaboration between tech and regulators to really find the right harmony and get really responsible players to really act.
I think you've hit upon the most important point, because we don't want at any time to stifle innovation. We want to accelerate all of the experimentation in this space, and yet that must come with ethical considerations. Are we winning that battle? Are you optimistic for the years ahead?
I think looking at, again, if we're using AI, which is really at the forefront of every discussion at the moment, I think trying to over-regulate outcome is a bit challenging at the moment, because it's moving extremely fast. And frankly, if one country over-regulates the outcome of the expected outcome of the AI, you're going to stifle deployment while other countries might accelerate. And it's a challenge. I mean, do you really want to allow other countries to move 10 years forward and you're behind? At the same time, you can't just leave it as a free rein. So probably the approach compared to other scenarios is, how do regulators and how do players from a governance point of view introduce and really try to force transparency? So rather than just the fact of you're trying to regulate outcome, and there needs to be some regulation to the outcome and the consequence of the outcomes or the deliverables of these AI systems, but at least as a foundation layer, deliver transparency. This system, as mentioned in the speech just before this chat, as mentioned, do we know really what's inside that black box? Do we know how it's actually made up? Do we have any kind of a clue of what went in? Because what went in is going to determine what comes out of that AI system. So I think there has to be a lot of focus on the transparency of what is in the system. And I think organizations that say, no, but that's my secret sauce and my X or my Y, I think it's very challenging to have these systems loose in the society in this regard. So finding a way of understanding what went in from an ethical boundaries point of view, and maybe creating some kind of a matrix that says, here is what we are going to want to know about. It's not about knowing how the guys coded the system, but it's more about knowing in different parameters. When it comes to religious belief, how did you code your system? What are you telling your system to say? When it comes to cultural stuff, when it comes to many other areas, maybe some parameters can be set where when people are trying to deploy things in a large part of the society, at least societies and regulators should be aware how was that system constructed, at least in that area, because that construction is at least a good indicator of what's going to come out. So I think examples of driving that transparency, examples of seeing what's a practical way of holding accountability. I mean, if your AI chatbot in an online conversation was rude to someone or was harassing someone, do you prosecute that chatbot, or what do you actually do? Do you prosecute the guy that created the chatbot? Who do you prosecute exactly in this regard? And I think these are all extremely challenging questions to answer. And before you really need to deal with human beings and manage the behavior of human beings. Now you're managing the behavior of human beings, artificial intelligence, and a combined artificial intelligence human being behavior, which is a very new behavior in this regard that we need to see how to deal with it.
We sit here in the capital of the Emirates, zooming out and looking at the global north and the global south. Much like the energy transition, we want this to be inclusive. How do we make sure that we are, when it comes to governance, for maybe emerging nations or developing countries?
I think one is in one side, yes, definitely trying to encourage the deployment of technologies, because an over-regulation or trying to take too long to enable technologies to be deployed is going to push many nations behind from an efficiency point of view, from a productivity point of view, in many areas. But at the same time, I think having a very close oversight from the regulators, from the governing bodies to say, okay, we're allowing this sandbox. The sandbox might be the country, the sandbox might be a certain environment, but we're allowing for this sandbox to operate while we know certain things in advance, so at least we can pre-anticipate what's going to happen, but at least deal with it quickly as different phenomena are observed. Because there will be certain things that we don't observe, that we have not expected behavior to be in that way. So I think having a very close view of what is happening in the market, how things are evolving from a technology point of view, and updating our regulation in a practical manner to deal with it, I think becomes extremely critical. But last but not least, I mean, we definitely have taken a dual strategy here in the UAE. We are adopting the latest technologies from the latest players, but we're also launching our own technologies that are also open source in this regard, like what we've launched in Falcon and other systems in the country like GIS and others, where we are also saying we will adopt the best that is out there. We will also build our own technologies that we know at least what's inside these technologies. We know what can be in these technologies, and actually we've made a number of them open source, because I think many of the small and emerging technologies, my advice would be really leverage an open source base and modify it to your need, because at least you can have better transparency in what is inside that system. I'm not saying it's a 0 or 1 game, only use open source or don't use open source, but at least what can be done using open source, and then you build commercial systems on top of that open source. At least you have a better understanding of what's in that system and the behavior of that system, and you don't wake up one day where you thought the system, for a very simple answer or a question, tell you go right. Next day morning, whoever programmed it decides, no, I'm going to tell the society to go left. If you don't control that box, you don't really control when does it say right and when does it say left, even though you thought it's going to say right for a very specific topic. So I think a close observation, driving transparency, I think leveraging at least an open source base is extremely critical for many societies in that regard, where at least you have a better control on the foundation of the technology that you're using, at least wherever it's applicable.
Lastly, Your Excellency, how do we ensure the trust of the public? Surely it falls to not only government but the private sector. How do we best foster that? What are the guardrails that must be in place?
I think trust would only come from transparency. And trust would only come from players really opening up and being very reactive to new behaviors that we are seeing from these technologies in the ecosystem. If large players today say, well, take it or leave it, this is how it's going to be, this is what our morals are, these are what our ethics are, this is how we want to behave, I don't think that's really a true partnership arrangement, and I don't think that really fits many societies in this regard. I don't think today, when it comes to the tech phase we are in now, there was the Web 1.0 phase, where the early days of the internet. And there were certain players that really became the dominant players at that time. There came a time when the Web 2.0, where all the applications were launched and all of these things, and few dominant players really dictate the game when it comes to that ecosystem. In the phase we are in now, in this AI phase and everything around the AI phase, from quantum technologies and others, if the world also gets to have few players dictate where AI goes, I don't think that's a good thing for humanity, and I don't think that's a good thing for societies. Because in this phase, AI is going to get into everything. In the Web 2.0, you might decide to use your video app or your social media app or whatever, you might decide not. In the AI world we are in, it is going to get into every part of our ecosystem, every part of our society, which means the world will be in a better situation where the few do not control the anchors of the technology. You really want this to be spread. You really want to have access to the right technologies. You want to have access to the right transparency. And I think many societies have to play a role, and regulators, to really ensuring that there are no only few dominant players globally that really dictates what happens in AI, because I don't think that's a good outcome. It has its benefits, but I think the downsides of it is extremely large in this regard, and you need a good balance. And I think, to end with the note, at least from my point of view, that the potential for leveraging latest technologies for emerging and smaller societies is massive. It is actually, if you want to say, AI, if you want to think of it, was done tailor-fit for really smaller societies to really get to punch way above its weight. Because AI can give you the 10x, 100x, 1000x force multiplier in this regard. So emerging economies and emerging countries and smaller countries, actually this is the time that you can play in the major league while not having to be a nation with 100 million, 500 million population in that regard. You can really punch above your weight. And startups in your countries and efficiencies in the country can move much faster with leveraging. So actually this is the time for really societies like us to take full advantage of where technology is at the moment, because it can really leapfrog us compared to many other countries and many other societies in that regard.